Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this second ELM test and trial. This evening, we are going to be looking at the test and trial in more detail, have an update on progress. We'll update people on ELM policy. You might have noticed there's been a announcement today, and we have a hotline of things that Defra want to highlight there. The third important thing we're going to be doing is introducing the concept of the toolkit, which is this test and trial is developing, because we'd really welcome your feedback. And of course, lastly, and most importantly, there'll be a chance for thoughts, questions, missing elements from all of that aspect and any issues related to Commons and ELM. So just some background before I hand over and we get started. Please use the chat. I see some of you are already. You can say hello to everyone, or you can say hello to individuals that if you look through the list. If you have any technical issues, put them in there as well, because we'll obviously try and resolve that, because we want you to enjoy this evening as much as possible. For questions, on the bottom, at least on my screen, it's the bottom, there's a Q&A slot, which has got like 2 bubbles in it. So put your questions in there that you want to ask in the session as they come up. What you're able to do as well is, if you look, there's a thumbs up sign there. If you click on that, then you're up voting that question. And that means we'll ask the most popular question in the Q&A session. So I'll be looking at those and pulling them out. Just to let you know as well, the session's being recorded, so you'll be able to listen back to it again, or you'll be able to share it with other people who you know can't make it. It's great to see the numbers, 117. I think we had over 150 people who signed up, so they'll be joining throughout the session. And I think I've covered everyone, and yes, I can see the slides. I hope everyone else can see as well, with me spotlighted by the side. And it's good to see so many familiar names on the chat. So looking forward to a really interesting evening tonight. So I'm going to hand over to Joanne Swires now, who's going to do the introduction and the first poll of the evening.
Evening, everybody, and great to see so many of you joining us. I'll introduce our sort of team who are directly working on the test and trial in a minute, but while I do that, maybe do you want to put the poll up, Susie? And people can be filling that in while I just introduce who's going to be talking tonight. So first of all, myself, or maybe I should do myself last. Anyway, I'll go first. So I'm Jo Swires, and I am the facilitator for the Elm Test and Trial for Commons. And I took up this post in July last year when the test and trial finally got up and running after a brief slow start with COVID. So also working with me on this test and trial, we've got Viv Lewis from the Federation of Cumbria Commoners. Are you there, Viv? Can you give us a little wave? Say hello, why not?
Yeah, I'll give you a little wave. I couldn't see anybody.
Yeah, okay. And then we've got Julia Aglin-Bit, who from the Foundation for Common Land. I forgot your job title then, Julia, sorry. But hey, there you are, and you're going to be speaking to tonight. And then we've got Susie Hodgson, who is in the background doing all the techie stuff with some other help. So good to see you, Susie. You're just a logo at the minute, but thanks. And then we've also got tonight one of our sort of local coordinators who's helping us on our common in Westerdale in the North York Moors, and that's Fraser Hugill. Are you there, Fraser? Great. Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thanks. So that's our team who are working on the test and trial, and Julia and Viv put the project together back in I guess it must have been January 2020 to run this. I think this is the only test and trial that is solely looking at commons. Hopefully quite a few of you joined us in December when we sort of introduced you to the test and trial and gave you an introduction, then told you a bit about what we were planning to do and where we got to. But in the last 6 months, we have cracked on. We had another lockdown, which slowed things a bit, but we're now sort of in full swing and doing lots of engagement at the moment. So we can't wait to tell you about that tonight and get some feedback from you. Are we okay with that? Has everybody filled in who wants to fill in on the poll? And I'll move on to the next slide. But people are still voting. We'll give it a minute and then we'll move on. Great, thanks. Are you able to close that now then? I could close it. There we go. So what we're going to do this evening, I'm going to talk first, just give us a bit of a recap of what our test and trial's all about, a bit of an update on progress, and then I'm going to pass to Julia and Viv, who are going to talk a little bit about not a whole load of policy, but policy issues that we think are really relevant to this test and trial. And then we will have a pause for a bit of chat and to respond to some of your questions. Then we're going to introduce the toolkit, and Julia and Susie will talk about that. And then we'll have more time for questions, hopefully, and we'll make sure we're all wrapped up for 9 o'clock. So I'll whiz on with my recap, hopefully. Now, why is that not moving? There we go. It is moving. So we're kind of coming towards the end of our sort of phase 1 of research, really, where we've been working with 4 commons across England, which are Nether Wasdale in the Lake District National Park, Westerdale in the North York Moors National Park, Minchinhampton Hampton and Rodborough in Cotswolds AONB, and Peter Tavey Common on Dartmoor. So they have been working with us to develop really and start to test a model for how an elm agreement might work for a common. And this model that we're looking at looks fairly simple. We'll tell you a bit more about it tonight. You might remember this from before, or you might not, but I'll just quickly remind you of what this model's all about. So it's basically some public goods mapping, putting together a baseline map of the public goods on the common, followed by a map of what the public goods on the common could look like, or the ambition for the common in 10 years' time. And then in between that, to get from A to B, is a commons management plan. So we're putting together a template for how that could look. And then underpinning all that, which is, how would we describe it? We're calling it a toolkit, and it's basically got all the templates, bits of guidance, checklists that you might need to help you put together. It's even got spades and screwdrivers and, and tractors and syringes, but they're all your tools. So all these different tools to help you put together an ELM agreement. So that's the model that we're developing and testing. And at the moment, we're doing it on those 4 commons. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back. And during the summer, I'll tell you a bit more about this later, but during the summer, we'll be working with a couple more commons, the New Forest, and hopefully a common in Exmoor, to test this out further. And there'll be other opportunities, which we'll tell you about later, for other commons, other interested people to get involved and help us trial some of these tools that we're putting together. So I'm going to pass to Julia and Viv now. First, Julia, just to give us an update on policy issues that we think are sort of really relevant and timely to tell you about in relation to our test and trial. So I'll pass to you now, Julia.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening, and thanks to all of you for attending. These events are really what you make of it, and we hope we're going to be able to provide some useful information. And thanks very much to everybody for putting this together. So today's been a big, really red letter day in terms of the development of ELM. We're just over 5 years since the referendum, and we're getting a bit of nuts and bolts now in relation to commons. Some of it good news, some of it not necessarily the news we were hoping for, but we want to sort of let you know what's happening. And this was announced about 10 to 3 this afternoon, some more details of the Sustainable Farming Incentive for 2022. So last time there were a whole load of slides we gave about that. Those things have moved on since then, and what we're having is the Sustainable Farming Incentive, then there will be the local nature recovery, and then the landscape recovery. At the moment, Defra are focusing on the SFI, and the SFI comes in 3 different forms. So we have the SFI pilot phase 1, which has been launched, and in a couple of days' time, those farmers who made expressions of interest will be able to apply, but that doesn't apply to commons. Then we have the, in terms of SFI 2022, which is the early rollout of SFI. And this is really to provide some support during the transition as BPS is phased out and to get people ready for ELM. And then there'll be the full SFI, which we expect to have sort of start 2024 with first schemes really live in 2025. So what we'd like to focus on today is a bit around SFI 2022 and how it's going to work on commons. And there's been a lot of work since December. So Defra have increased their team working on commons, and we've been working well with them. They've also working across the Defra family, and in particular working well with the RPA, because certainly for the first few years, RPA will be delivering these schemes there until, I believe, until they're committed until 2024, and we don't know, the delivery partner hasn't been confirmed for after then. But we've got a very good relationship with the RPA, a really good team of people we're working with there, as well as at Defra. And for us, it's joining the bits. There's no point having a scheme that doesn't work. So in terms of SFI 2022, there's going to be a soil standard for arable and for horticulture, and also a soil standard for improved grassland. And then there's going to be a moorland and rough grazing SFI standard, and there is going to be an animal health and welfare plan paid for. So you will have noticed that there is a gap there, and we've issued a press release today about our disappointment about there not being a standard for unimproved grassland. There's about 300,000 hectares of unimproved grassland in England, and so far that is not included. That does cover a lot of lowland commons, and we have made our views clear on this. In terms of the SFI on moorland, most SFI standards you might have seen have 3 levels of ambition. So they have an introductory, an intermediate, and an advanced. For the SFI on moorland, there's going to be just one for 2022. There's going to be one standard, and that is the introductory area. They're going to be looking at how we can put together a sort of what you might call a map, a plan, details of what is on your common. So it's a matter about knowing what we've got. In one of our internal webinars, a farmer said, you know, I need to know what I've got on my common so I can then sell. Oh, it says audio keeps dropping out. I'm sorry about that. If that's a common problem, will someone please tell me again? So I'm coming close to the computer, so hopefully you can hear. Okay, thank you. So in terms of what we're being asked, what in terms of the moorlands, what we're looking at, there are various elements to it. So the first thing is going to be logging what is on your common. So this is something that commons and the commons will be paid for in order to do, and all moorland. So whether you're on a common or not on moorland or not on a common, everything above the moorland line will be paid for in order to put together this plan. Once you've got the plan of what is there, the next stage is designing what could you do and what is the future management of your common. And that again will be all encompassed in the payment. Then you will be putting together a livestock management plan in terms of animal health and welfare. That's included as well. So it's really about, I suppose you could say, getting prepared for ELM for 2024. And that is the purpose. In terms of how it's going to be rolled out, these will be schemes that the Commons Association will apply for. So there will be collective schemes as with HLS, UELS and CS. So each common will apply as a common for that. And that's really the main thing I wanted to say with regard to the current policy. In terms of the other schemes, as we come into the autumn and then into next year, there will be a phase 2 of the SFI pilot. And then in 2022, there will be a pilot of local nature, the LNR scheme, the local nature recovery scheme. And those will include commons there. So I think that's probably enough. I'm happy to say more later or to take questions, but there's quite a lot to absorb there. So the key message is for SFI 2022, you will receive a payment to map what's on your common and put together a plan of how to manage your common to deliver public goods.
Thank you, Julia, that is great. And that'll lead us in nicely to some of the work we've been doing on management plan templates and assessing the public goods on your common. And just to say, as we're developing these tools, they'll be available for anybody who wants to have a look at them, have a go and review them for us too. So I'm just going to pass on, next slide is for Viv, who's just going to say a little bit. We thought it was just worth mentioning the new Farming in Protected Landscapes scheme, which was launched last week. Which again is pretty relevant to us. So I'm just going to pass to you now then, Viv. Here's your, why is your slide not coming up? I'm trying to move it forward. There we go.
Okay, well, I'd like to say welcome everybody, and it's really great there's so many people on this webinar. Most of you will know that this was announced last week. I've had a quick look at it, and so we've probably got some people on this call who have actually been involved in the design of it. So I apologise in advance if I mangle it or get anything wrong, and perhaps you could put me right. This is a scheme for commons in national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty. It's a program that lasts 3 years, and on average, I mean, for most of the national parks and AONBs, it's about around £1 million a year. And it's got, the projects that people write have got to meet one of 4 themes. The themes are climate, nature, people, and place. Now, in terms of climate, climate-wise, we know that things are likely to get worse in the near future, and the landscape needs to be more resilient to climate change. It needs to cope better with extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, high temperature, wildfires. These are all things that we could potentially see on commons. And so the programme itself wants to encourage things like more carbon storage and sequestration on common land in the whole of the national parks and AONBs. And also for farmers and land managers to know more about how to store carbon and sequester carbon on their land. Farmers and land managers, it could help farmers and land managers work towards net zero, and it's looking at how flood risk can be reduced. In terms of nature, the main outcome is increased biodiversity, again in national parks and AOBs, through more and better space for nature. So it's about encouraging more wildlife-rich habitats, greater connectivity between these habitats, and existing habitats are better managed. The people one is it's about getting more people into these areas, but also a more diverse range of people who can enjoy and understand the landscape. And this can be done by better access, better parking, more interpretation, more farm walks, open farms, and volunteering and conservation projects. And there are clearly other projects that people can do. And the final theme is place. And that's about the quality and the character of the landscape is increased. And this can be done through conserving historic features on farms and in the landscape, drying stone walls and hedges, and a lot more. So when I was looking at this, on first reading, it may seem that there isn't much in it for actual practical farming and commons and commoning. But on reflection, and with a lot of creativity, there's a lot to like and a lot to bid for. Commons, whether uplands or lowlands, do already contribute to these 4 themes and can get better at it. Okay, I'm sorry, I was just looking at a note from Chris, apologies. So, I was trying to think about what commoners and commoners associations could do. We can try out carbon audits that take into account carbon sequestration and the capacity of natural or semi-natural grasslands. But how do we actually do carbon accounting on commons? Because we've got carbon footprinting tools, but how do you actually do it when you've got collective management? We need to look at that. And how does it fit in with farmers, individual farmers and their own farms? How are we going to look at that? And these are things that we might be looking through for the test and trials, but also within this program. A lot of this stuff is all new to us, and it gives us the opportunity to try these things out. There has been lots of work on natural flood management on commons, but what works best and where and how? So it could be a time for a review of all the things that have been done up to now. And one thing that actually interests me quite a lot is, what is the carbon footprint of extensive livestock management? Is it better or worse than intensive animal husbandry? We know our livestock produce less and are less productive, but is its impact lighter in terms of inputs and outputs of our products? Is there less waste from what we do? So there's a lot to look at. But then, the one thing that I do worry about this program, and it's about the whole application process. I've had a quick look at the application form, and it is really quite onerous. And of course, that's appropriate if you're going for big funding. The grants, some of the grants are between, say, £5,000 and £250,000. But it seems a bit disproportionate for small grants that are actually going to be selected and seen by a team member rather than the panel. So I'm wondering if those who have devised the scheme can think of a much easier application for small grants, because there is a lot of paperwork there. And the money for each area isn't huge, and it could get swallowed up by a few projects. And that's slightly worrying, really, as it appears as a first comes, first served sort of condition, to this grant. So we could get 2 or 3 or 4 big projects, and there's no money left for anyone else in the year. And this could count against, smaller people, those of us who don't have dedicated grant funders or oven-ready projects. So there's something about the process that I think could be refined a bit, but I think it's a great opportunity and there's a lot to like about it. So I'll stop there now.
Thank you, Viv. That's great introduction to the new. I'm calling it FIPL already. We're already falling into we fall into the acronyms, don't we? I think somebody might have had their hand raised in the Q&A. Was it? Do we want to just respond to that? Okay. Or if you want to maybe put, if you've got a question, a hand raise, perhaps you could put it into the Q&A if that's okay.
And Blackburn had a hand raised. Can you unmute that?
I can answer it live if you like now. I mean, I think that's a worry. You know, when you read the guidance, it does say if you're just outside the national park, you might be able to put in an application. But really, I'm not qualified to answer that question. But I recognise it as a concern, and thank you for asking that question.
Sorry, yeah, just to confirm, Viv, the question is, what about commons or you know, which are SSIs, SPAs, SACs, but outside national park and AOMBs. So
yeah, that's what I saw. Yeah.
I think, yeah, if you are outside, then hopefully there's another scheme.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that one. So thank you, Viv. We'll move on a bit now. I'll tell you a bit more about what we've been doing these last few months with the test and trial. I don't know if I've got weak fingers tonight, but the slides don't like moving very quickly. Oh, Charlotte's got a hand raised. Do you want to Charlotte, to take a question from Charlotte while I'm trying to move the slide forward? Why won't it do it?
Charlotte's asked the question about on the Q&A. Chris, shall I answer Charlotte's question about on the?
Yes, which one?
It was the one about the role for Foundation for Common Land to keep a record of projects going forward.
Yep.
Well, there's another one as well.
No, go for that one.
So yes, Charlotte, what we were thinking of doing with FIPL was putting together, talking and working with commoners organisations across England, particularly who's obviously in protected areas, and seeing what the need is and actually supporting commoners to put together applications. Because as you say, we don't want to duplicate. So it's not just a record of the projects that people have already put in, but supporting people in developing those projects, because often there's going to be a similar need in different areas. So people might want to be learning how to assess the peat and the carbon stored in their soils. It might be in grassland soils, it might be in peat soils. And so that might be something that we can address at a national scale. So I think there's really good idea to keep a list of the projects that are going forward, and we can act as recording that. People are very welcome to send us abstracts of those, but also we would like to work with you in the New Forest and also others in other areas, Dartmoor, Yorkshire, Cumbria and elsewhere, so that we can make sure that we're all collectively benefiting from each other's expertise.
Thank you, Julie.
I'm going to go back to sharing if that's okay then. Thanks for that. Here we go. So moving on a little bit to where we're up to with our test and trial and what we've been working on. If you remember that bit at the beginning, I showed you that model, and the first bit of the model says make a map of the public goods on the common, and when you read that, I think, all right, just crack on with that. But as soon as we sort of started work on the test and trial, we realised there's things to do before you can start doing that are really important steps. It seem quite basic, but are really important to get things set up to work in a way that's going to be really useful for putting an agreement together. So there are a couple of steps that seem really obvious, but I think are really important. So I just wanted to highlight them. and the things that we've come up with straight away. So there's a huge amount of information already out there on Commons, tends to be huge amount. And for us, that was I'm struggling with this, moving it forward. So gathering that information together, finding out where it is, who has it, how to access it, and what it says, whether it's up to date, where it is. Here's some of the things that we've come across, and they're owned and saved in lots of different places. But to find out what's already out there, the information that's already out there about public goods on the common, we think it's an important first step before you even start talking about the public goods or trying to assess them. And I still can't move my slides forward. I might go back to just showing you the, sorry about this. For some reason, it doesn't like my slideshow. I'm going to save it like, I'll try that.
Joe, I could open it on mine if you'd prefer.
But I think I might prefer you to do that, yeah, because it's just not clicking forward at all. But I'll show you this one while we're. It did it a bit at the beginning, didn't it? And then it stopped. It stopped working. Sorry, everybody. Keep your questions coming while we're doing this. Shall I stop sharing then?
Yeah, I'll share.
Okay. Slide is when we get it. Thanks. That's coming up now? Oh, we're getting there. Thank you. Sorry, there's all these little click throughs as well. Brilliant. So yeah, so the issue around this is where we're up to. Thank you, Julie. That's great. So for us, the issue around this is where do we find this information? Is it accessible? How do we find it? Who's got it? Is it useful? Is it relevant? And what do we do with it? And then if you could move on to the next slide, please, Julia. If it'll let you. Great, thanks. So the other big question to start out with before we even think about the public goods is who is involved with the common, who's got an interest, who's got an influence. If you just want to keep clicking, Julia. So one of the tools we've put together is just a really simple sort of stakeholder map, really, if you want to call it that, or analysis. A piece of work to do before you start putting together your plans for the common or thinking about public goods is who are the people that are involved, who've got an interest, have got an influence, and there's a whole ream of people that come under different headings. So we've tried to split it up a bit, but obviously starting with the owners and rights holders, whether they're active or inactive graziers, the Commons Association, the owner, and then a whole ream of other people. And the other question that maybe you'll say something about this in a minute, Fraser, we were talking about it earlier today, but who does this preparation? This actually could be quite a big piece of work if you're on a big common. Who gets the people together? Who starts gathering this information? Who gets people talking and starting to generate interest and agreeing that this is something that you want to do? Do you want to say what you thought earlier, Fraser, when we were talking about it?
I suppose among the team, I seem to have got a bit of a Yorkshire reputation, and who's going to pay for it? That was my sort of immediate reaction, because obviously there's potentially quite a large cost of doing that. I remember on Westerdale doing the HLS 10 years ago, and the amount of time, if I'd costed it out on my consultancy rates, it would have been fairly expensive. So that's potentially quite a big issue for a common, particularly a common that maybe doesn't have the money in the bank. So I think that's going to be one thing going forward. I think the other thing that just sort of jumped up at me, Joe, when we're looking at that is, and it's one of our next sort of tasks on Westerdale, is this issue of inactive graziers. Sort of 10 years ago, perhaps, when we were talking about active management, that wasn't such an issue, but as we know, we've got inactives that have been claiming BPS on commons, and they're perhaps going to be more interested moving forward. So that might be something Julia will chip in with later as well, in terms of how that might work.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Julia? Okay, so this is a bit of a reflection from me, really. So as soon as we started this work and started thinking about identifying the public goods, and obviously we took the list of headings that come under the ELM guidance of what public goods are and what they could involve. And as soon as we started looking on the 4 commons, and I'm very pleased to say that I've visited all of them now, which is great, so that now we're allowed to move around a bit more, but you are tripping over public goods on a common, aren't you? Ones that are in great condition, others that we'd really like to improve and do more with, but whether it's from clean water, stunning landscapes, tripping over heritage and archaeology on Dartmoor, to world-class, absolutely world-class habitats, wildflowers on Minchinhampton and Rodborough, beautiful views, great traditional breed sheep. Today, you know, just a stunning landscape in Westerdale. So there's just so much out there, and it sort of hits you in the face as soon as you sort of start thinking about this. And then the big challenge is, how do we record this, assess what condition it's in now, and think about what we could do with it in the future. So that's what we've been tackling. You can move on to that next one if you like. That's great, Julia. Thanks. Yeah, and the mapping one. So that's what we've been tackling over the last few months, and we've had a few different tools that we've tried. On the left-hand side of this slide, this is some of the information that, you know, was already available. We talked about the fact that there's information all over the place, and it's about gathering it together. So, for example, the one at the top there is a North York Moors National Park set of records, and then down at the bottom, that's the priority habitats for Westerdale, isn't it? I can't see that. Moving on. I won't look too closely. And then we've got a sweet map from Dartmoor. So there's all this information out there. What do we do with it? How do we find it? And how can we use it? So then on the right-hand side, the sort of 2 main things we've been trying so far. One is quite a traditional way of handing out physical maps and checklists to commoners, which we did in Cumbria. And we did this mainly because we weren't able to meet people in groups. So Sue, our facilitator there, sent out a public goods checklist and a physical printed map to the commoners there, and asked them to go through the checklist and fill in what they thought were the important public goods on the common. And they sent that back into us. So at the bottom, you can see behind that purple box, there's some great photos that the chairman of the common at Nether Wasdale took actually when he was having a wander about important views, important heritage. Then the top one was another tenant who picked out the important habitats that he thought were really key on the common. And what we did then, we've been working with Ordnance Survey. We asked Ordnance Survey to put new maps together based on those physical ones. And we shared those actually yesterday. We had a really good workshop on Nether Wasdale, reviewing that and adding to it. Yeah, Claire, you did that. Thank you. It's nice to see you there. So Claire Burney and Ordnance Survey put those together for us. And that was a really successful way yesterday of generating some good discussion. So then the other thing we've been having a go at is using Land App. Some of us are quite new to it. So Jo Lee in the Cotswolds has been helping us with that. She's our facilitator there. One of the things we've been doing with the RPA is getting the parcels onto Land App that haven't been accessible before for the commons that we're working with. And that's been a really useful starting point. So we want to try and do a bit more of that. 1 or 2 people have used Magic as well. So it's about finding the way that suits people and that they can access. And hopefully then the toolkit will have different bits of advice for how people might want to tackle their mapping. So I think that's all to say about that. Can't remember what's on this next one. Keep going. Okay, yeah, thanks. So the next one is, sorry, there's a lot of words in this one, but this is what we've been thinking about in terms of a common management plan. So like I just said, we're working on putting together the maps of public goods and thinking about how we do that. The other thing just to say about that is we've also been thinking about, I think I saw a question about getting specialist advice to assess the condition of certain public goods, particularly habitats on the common, you know, and who you would go to do that. Again, you'd have to pay for that if you want somebody to do that for you, and to assess the sort of baseline condition of public goods on the common, particular habitats. So our thinking now, moving on to a common management plan. We've been sort of batting this around between us and thinking about what sort of probably a document this would be, but we hope not a document that you would write at the beginning of your agreement and then dust off 10 years later to remind yourself what was in there, but hopefully something that would guide you and that you'd work with as you were going through your sort of period of having that ELM agreement. So this is something that we're really keen to test with people and people to trial out for us and add to and give us feedback on. So this should be a good opportunity over the summer if people are interested in getting involved in this. But as a headline, really, we think it's for agreeing the priorities for the common, setting out who's doing what, and also going back to you, Fraser, who's getting paid for it, tracking progress and being accountable, so that we can show, Commons can show what difference they're making, what's been successful, what's maybe not going so well, what they're learning. Can we have the next block, please? I'm not sure what's going to pop up. Here we go. So what we think it should include, definitely something around good governance arrangements, an overview of the public goods, and I think we would try to match it in with what's on the maps. So the big maps would accompany this plan, and then we talk about obviously priorities and where we are now, where we want to get to, which would tie in very much with those two maps, and then listed in here the management actions to get there. Just want to flick on to the next few boxes, Julia. Thanks. So I'll let you read that. I don't want to just read it out to you, but again, it seems to me that there's probably that purple box at the bottom. There's a bunch of people who would need to work on this together and agree what goes in there, which goes back to this making sure you've got somebody who can help you to sort of facilitate those discussions and work together. And then we imagine there's probably a mix of how it might be presented. Obviously the maps, we've started talking a little bit about doing the sort of, can't remember what you call it now, but the monitoring where you sort of take photos at the same point every few years or every year, and to see how things are changing. Maybe a bit of colour coding to kind of show where you are now, maybe a traffic light sort of system. Things are green, they're looking good. Things are red, there's room for improvement. And then some text in there as well. And then the other thing, we've talked quite a lot about this in the last few days that we think is really important, is that this, if it's going to be a working tool, we'd probably want to review this every year. Maybe you do it at your AGM, your Commons Association AGM, or your council, perhaps do a walk of the common or look at photos to see how things are changing. And that would be your way of seeing if you feel like you're on the right track. If there's new things you want to do, you might want to update the plan, or if the things that are not working, you might want to change them. So it was something that would be much more active than just a plan that sits there and doesn't change for the 10 years. So that's our thoughts on a common management plan. I think we were going to maybe take a break now from us talking and have a look at some of your questions. So we could maybe stop sharing and, oh, sorry, last one. I forgot about this one. Now that you're sharing them, Julia, I can't remember what comes next. So this is just a page out of our sort of template for the Commons management plan. So it might look something like this. And obviously the habitats would depend on, we can go back from that one. That comes after the break, Julia, thanks. Thank you. So yeah, this is just maybe how it might look. So you'd have a section for each kind of suite of public goods, each different category of public goods. You'd have your assessment of what it looks like at the moment, where you'd want it to get to, and the actions to get there. And I think we were talking about this earlier today, those actions in there, they might be the summary. You might have something that goes into a bit more detail that sits at the back of this. But you'd want something that's, you know, fairly succinct that you could show to people and share to get a good overview of what your plans are for your Elm agreement on that common. And a few issues there, if you need any issues to generate any more questions, you know, so for example, the who does what question, how does the owner get involved? What do they do? What do the graziers commoners do? How is that work split? And that obviously then, and I think in here, setting out upfront who gets paid for what, and being really clear. And obviously we don't know quite yet exactly what the payment rates are going to be for different public goods, but that's just something that we're still thinking about and asking that question. And I think there might be some questions in the Q&A about that as well. So thanks. We'll take a pause, shall we?
Great, thanks, Joe, very much. And Julia and Viv, very well managed. And it wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without a few technical challenges. I realised at the beginning I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Chris Short, I'm chair of the Foundation for Common Land. But not directly involved, but yeah, fascinating to see how this is progressing. Thank you so much for your questions. I'm just looking at that now, and So starting at the one with the most votes, Charlotte, you've got two at the top. Two at the top. Well done. But I'll leave the one about the toolkit because that comes after the break. But the second one there is, my fear is that to have a comprehensive understanding of what anyone holding or common has requires assessment over a year or at least two, so that we need to start doing something now. I guess that, Joe, the sense that what, you know, if you're a grazier on the call now, what can they start doing now, you think, which would be good preparation for what's likely to come?
Well, it comes in. Did you ask me to answer that one? That's,
well,
that's fine. Yeah, or if anybody else wants to chip in, feel free. But I mean, this is an interesting point straight away, because as we've started work, already, you know, a couple of commons straight away would want some help to work out what the condition of their habitats are. You know, the grassland is on the common, and they want some opinion from, you know, some independent opinion from outside, which of course costs money. I think Julie, you might want to chip in on that, but you know, that's an issue straight away, and we're able to do that with a little bit of that through some of the money we've got for the test and trial. But obviously, you know, most people don't have that pot of funding to draw on, do they? No. I'll pass to you, Julia.
Thanks. So yes, we were discussing this today with Defra. Had 2 hours this afternoon. The Foundation for Common Land, we chair the Uplands Alliance, and we had the great benefit of having Lynn Phillips, the director for ELM, with us for those 2 hours. And we very much made the point about both, you know, these assessments in terms of the SFI. And I know, Charlotte, doesn't help the New Forest, but in terms of what they're thinking about for moorland, is that you do a sort of initial assessment year one, and then you do continuing assessments on a proportion of the common in subsequent years. So they very much recognise this is something that needs to happen over time, and that, as you say, if you do something in one season or one particular time of the year, it may be different to other seasons or other times of the year. So they're seeing the assessment as an ongoing process. The other thing is that we had a really good conversation about who does the assessment, and clearly in some areas people will require professional support, but also perhaps, and I can say this sort of guilty as charged as having another role as a land agent, that if you very much contract out the assessment to other third parties, then the commoners and owners don't necessarily take ownership of what's there or necessarily understand what's on their common. So yes, advisory support will be required, but in a very different way perhaps to the part. So we can develop systems, and we were discussing, Natural England were on the call as well, and discussing systems so whereby they develop templates, and this is the sort of thing we'll be helping Defra with, develop systems for a condition assessment. Their big thing, what they want is condition assessment, both, and for the peat depths as well. Now, there's still a paucity of information about how carbon is stored in grassland soils, and that's something that, you know, we need to think about as well, because you can have thin soils and thick soils on grasslands as well. But it's very much realising it's not a snapshot in time. It will happen over time, and our views will evolve.
Very good. Thank you, Julia. While you're spotlighted, some quick fire ones on the list here. So have Defra given a reason why lowland commons are excluded, or just lowland grassland, really?
Yes, they have, and I can read out. I've had a sort of, I think, an official response. Below is our reasoning. The actions required to deliver public goods on improved grassland are different to what is required on low, no input grassland. At which point I said, yes, we know that they're different because they're different habitats. I won't tell you exactly what I said, had the word Sherlock in it, but anyway. The low, then number two, the low, no input grasslands are very well covered via countryside stewardship. So what Defra are thinking is, and I mean, clearly we have a difference of opinion with Defra, and I know Defra have given this a lot of thought. So I want to be sort of fair. It's not as though this is a decision they've just made. We happen not to agree with it because we believe a lot of unimproved grassland, whether on a common or off a common, is immensely valuable for nature. And the way people manage that is through having both their BPS and their stewardship payments. And together it makes a package that hopefully keeps you viable. If you remove one half of that package, then suddenly the sums don't add up, particularly when you need very sensitive grazing. And we know from our work on Minchinhampton and Rodborough and from the feedback there that grazing cattle on a lowland common with a lot of traffic, a lot of public access, is immensely challenging and therefore costly. And this is why we feel that stewardship in itself, even if they put the prices up, I've had lots of sort of academics and policy people email me this afternoon saying, Julia, surely it's okay because stewardship rates are going to go up. When I'm going, stewardship rates are going up for everyone. What we're looking here is to have a broader suite of public goods that all farmers are rewarded for. So yes, maybe the rate should go up for biodiversity, and we're hoping, if what Eustace said today is correct, they may go up by as much as 30%. But then what about the other public goods? And someone's already referred to beauty engagement. We've got sort of flood management, water quality, heritage. There are carbon storage. There are many other things that are not yet paid for. So that will be my response. If anybody's got other good ideas, please put them in the chat. And the countryside stewardship, this is bullet number 3 from Defra. Countryside stewardship continues to be available, and we are encouraging take up of these options on the basis we expect them to be brought into the new scheme at a later date. But if you're already in a stewardship, you can't be in stewardship twice, is my answer to that. And then it says the fourth and final bullet point is there are opportunities for all BPS recipients to be rewarded for the delivery of public goods via a combination of countryside stewardship and the sustainable farming incentive. Well, it all depends how you interpret the agricultural transition plan. My view is that if your farm is mostly unimproved grassland because you've decided not to plough up your grassland over the last 50 years, surely you're doing what we really want people to be doing, farming with nature. So it seems this is the wrong time to be penalised for not putting down ryegrass and clover. I'm not that there's anything wrong with ryegrass and clover per se, but we're looking about farming with nature. So I think it's a huge shame, a major disappointment, and our main concern at the Foundation for Common Land, this will be a perverse incentive whereby farmers may be feel encouraged to improve their unimproved grassland in order to be more eligible for payments going forward. And we will be making those points to Defra, but we're in a very active engagement. I've been exchanging texts and emails all day with them.
Great, thank you, Julia. Yes, I'm well aware and some really good coverage on that. So some quick fire ones, perhaps, because we've got sort of 5 minutes or so. So livestock, Berit asked a question about recognition of native breeds in schemes. So I don't know who wanted. Julie, you've disappeared off spotlight. I don't know if you wanted to respond to that one.
Well, yes, and I think Viv may be able to add in because Viv's been involved in one of the practitioner groups as well. We're not able to, there have been draft standards for the intermediate and advanced, and in the advanced tier of ambition, so it's what's called a level of ambition. I'm sorry the language is so challenging. We're finding it challenging as well, even having seen it for many months. So there are standards, and within each standard there is 3 levels of ambition. And it is that native breeds and local breeds, so there may be some local breeds that aren't at risk, they're native breeds at risk and local breeds, they will be rewarded through SFI advanced level of ambition is what is proposed. Everything at the moment is still under discussion. In terms of lowland commons, we would expect perhaps maybe through a lake, the local nature recovery. And that's the other thing to remember. And Defra did ask us, and they're completely correct in making sure that we realise that there's a package of measures. This does make it complicated, but SFI is only part of the story. So 30% of the budget of 2.4 billion will be on SFI, 30% will be on local nature recovery, and 30% will be on landscape recovery. So it's really important not to just rely on SFI. If we're looking at running viable businesses, we should be looking particularly on commons, at local nature recovery, and also at landscape recovery, where that doesn't have to be, you know, lots of people have said landscape recovery is rewilding. That's not the case. There will be rewilding projects within that, but it's not the only form of land use there.
Okay, Viv, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, I did want to, I mean, in my stakeholder group, there was a lot of discussion around where native breed should sit in terms of the, you know, whether it's introductory, intermediate, and advanced. And quite a lot of us were proposing that it should be into the, the introductory level. But I don't, well, I mean, the jury's still out and there's still room for, discussions again, but at the moment it is in the advanced level.
Your feedback is welcomed, because the more we can give feedback, and we do have a really good discussions with Defra, so please, please do encourage you to feed in, and then we can continue. Particularly today, we had a very good discussion with one of the Natural England people who's supporting Defra, so please keep questions going.
Questions are pouring in, Julia, don't you worry. And we will get to them all one way or the other. So we've got them recorded. So someone put in the chat about where did the 30% upgrade come? I put a link in the chat, which is George Eustace's speech today at Serial's event. And he says something about, we were stuck with income foregone when we were in the EU. And because we're out, we can now uplift. So in a sense, that's good news, but it looks like it's 30% upgrade of all. So this is there and moving away from income foregone as well. And the questions are changing in front of me because people are voting, which is really good. So Tracy Williams made a very good point. She's from New Forest National Park, where she said that they will be interested in projects just outside the protected landscape where it impacts on the protected area. So catchments, for example, would be a good example. So obviously contact your national park with details about that. And I think, so each of the national parks will be discussing it. So there should be more detail coming out there. I was just about to read one, it's moved. So that means it's probably gone up. So again, Tracy said, low input grassland option under CS is very difficult to achieve in the New Forest, and pulling off many is probably not the only place. If you only have a few acres and cut for silage, etc. So yeah, meeting the low input prescriptions is difficult. Jennifer Dodds, right, let's see if I can highlight it, it won't move then. No, it does. Commons management plan sounds amazing. Thank you. That's right. I like that sort of comment. The idea of a working tool is useful. Fantastic tech so far. Been utilised management plans, etc. Living documents, well, which farmers can collaborate with and update when they need. Hard to remember and collate things. So I'm guessing living documents is a really good process, Joe, which you'll be incorporating. Viv's nodding, so that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, well, one is we want to keep it simple and recognise that people are not going to want to spend, loads of time updating their plans all the time. But at the same time, we think if the plan is going to be useful and it's going to be something that you want to go back to, that you want to be accountable for, show your progress against, then it would be easy to update it. You wouldn't have to go through some big long-winded bureaucratic process to make the odd change now and again. So that's the idea, that it would be something that's very much a working document. I'm glad that you like that, Jennifer. That's great.
A couple of questions from David Thomas here. Mapping, always a contentious issue on Commons. RPA are using satellite imaging, but this will not show many of the relevant features to the mapping proposed by this group. So obviously we don't, is there a mismatch between the way the RPA work and the sort of mapping which we're doing? So he says, our RPA maps only break the landscape down to woodland, scrub, grassland, even though there are many ambiguities. And his second quick question is, how will the actions be linked to the payments? E.g., we receive grants based on land use, but the main activities will be scrub management and restrictive grazing. So I don't know if
I can say something about that first bit of that question, which, you know, obviously we don't know yet, but the way that we've been doing it so far is we kind of almost having different layers, different map layers for different suites of public goods, really. So it was interesting yesterday when we were in Cumbria. You know, we had there's a map which is very much focused on the habitats and the wildlife. There was another one that somebody had put together and they'd focused, and this is coming directly from the commoners and graziers, so the things that they thought were important. One focused quite a lot in on water quality. Others were talking very much about heritage and archaeology. There were bits that we highlighted on the map together around visitor access and pressure, and footpaths and erosion, and you know, we don't know yet, obviously, what the payment rates are going to be like for these different things. But at the minute, we're encouraging commoners to tell us what they think is important in terms of public goods on their common, and we're trying to map that. So I imagine that one could end up all being on one map, or we might have different layers for different categories of public good.
Great.
If that makes sense.
Let's leave that there. As I said, all questions will be responded to at some point or other. So we're going to carry on with the agenda now, and let me find again, because I think we're over to Julia, and now we're going to talk about the concept of the toolkit. So Charlotte, this is your first question. So yeah, over to you, Julia.
Okay to share, Julia?
Yeah, I'm going to. I'll share.
Seemed to work better, didn't it? Yeah. Great.
So Susie and myself, and with Connie's support, we're working on the toolkit, and some of you might have seen our website, I hope, and we had a new website about 18 months ago. And what we're keen to do is to have an easily accessible, colourful website. So it's a different approach to gov.uk. And for those of you who are sort of old enough to be watching Play School, we've only got the arch window here. We haven't got the round window, the square window. But anyway, the idea is that we have these arches, and we go, you can go through an arch, and you can find more information according to what your need is. So we're focusing we're just putting this together as part of the test and trial, and we hope it's going to be a really good resource, and we're really very appreciative of the support from Defra in order to put this together. And it's something that will be live, that will grow. If people send us more information, we can add it on to our website. So it's embedded within the FCL website, so that it's not sort of a standalone that will will age. So that's the plan. And can
I just chip in there, Julia, and just say the reason why I highlighted those 5 boxes on the right were they're the ones that we're really sort of focusing in on through the test and trial.
Yes.
So that's what, for example, obviously tonight we've been talking about a lot about public goods.
Yeah.
About people, and so these are the bits that we're building on all the time and adding bits of content to, which we're looking forward to people testing. So I just pulled those 5 out because they're the ones that kind of
really, and the focus, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, I think the key is we're quite, we've all got, everybody really on the school, I imagine, has joined because they have some experience of commons, and we've all got some lived experience of that, and we see the governance is absolutely essential. We do know that all payments under ELM on commons will go through to the association, so there's going to be, governance is absolutely critical, and this accountability, and someone mentioned in one of the questions, this is public money, and as a commoner in Durham said to me, Julia, they're closing Alzheimer's clinics in Newcastle and they're still paying us our HLS money, so it's really important that we can show that we're using the money wisely and for the purpose for which it is being provided. So governance is critical. Also, when problems arise, or if someone sells their farm or what happens, making sure you've got a robust agreement. understanding public goods, Susie's going to take us through sort of how you'll find out a bit more how to do that. People engagement, that's Joe's already covered some of that, finding and making sure you've got all the key people involved, so you don't suddenly discover, you know, that you've missed someone out, you know, later down the line, and then that disrupts getting an agreement. The finance, as I said, we covered the finance. That's absolutely critical, particularly with capital works and the scale of capital works that may be required and is often happening now with peat restoration and with scrub planting. And then this commissioning of advice. How can you best use advice? Most people don't do their own cesarean on a, you know, on their cow. They would get the vet in to do that. So there's nothing, you know, intrinsically wrong about bringing in specialists. What you want to do is make sure you've got the best specialist for the job and that you agree with them about what they're going to do for you. So you're managing expectations, your expectations and the consultant's expectations, and making sure you get legal advice where required, particularly linked to the governance. But there are lots of new things. Now today, it was very interesting when we were talking this afternoon about the SFI 22, and we were looking at, a lot of you may have heard about carbon credits, and in addition to ELM, there's going to be private financing. So someone said to me the other day, oh, well, we can get this money from Burger King and EasyJet, or you can get carbon credits and this, that, and the other. And I did say, well, I wasn't very interested in taking those particular companies' money, but the principle is there that there will be many private companies who wish to offset their carbon by paying on commons and on other land in order for people to be sequestering carbon that offsets their emissions. And what we want to make sure is that if you're doing all this work as part of SFI 22, of the introductory level of ambition, that you don't have to redo it in 5 years' time when suddenly somebody comes along and offers you a good deal. So you want to be collecting that data, you want to be able to store it in a way that can be shared. You want to be able to make sure it can be updated easily. So there are lots of new things we need to learn as we go on, and flood management is another one where you may need modelling. So Susie, did you want to move on to the next? I can move on to the next slide. Do you want to? Oh, the other thing is that please make sure that you can tell us tell us. We're going to be having more sessions in future about what you like about this, what you don't like about it, what's missing.
Yeah, one of our key messages really with the toolkit is obviously we want to make it available. It'll be on our website, it'll be on a tab, so it's easily navigable. It's available to everybody. We wanted to make sure there's obviously a huge amount of information available, but we wanted to make sure that people could easily pick out the bits they needed, move backwards and forwards. So some of the key areas that Joe said, obviously there's a lot of areas, and we had 9 icons up there. So there's a lot of information that we plan to populate, which is obviously going to take us some time. But we're really focusing in on the test and trials. We've brought some key issues and some key elements which are really important for Elm, and the areas that not everybody has as much information that they would like or isn't as easily available. So our aim is really to try and bring together as much information as we can as a tool to empower people, so you can come into here, dip in when you need to, move through. So with public goods, for example, here we've got these are just all clickable links, and it's still a little bit work in progress, so some of it will look a bit prettier. You have to bear with us. So they'll be able to click into document what are public goods, some guidance on how to map your assets, some mapping options available, so you can click backwards and forwards, and we're trying to provide literally some step-by-step guides for using things like Land App, some introductory videos, so people can hopefully dip in and out. We're hoping to make all the documents downloadable as well. It's just to provide a bank of information, really. Obviously, we can't cover everything. We can't tell you how to, as Julia and other people have mentioned, we can't tell you how to do a biodiversity survey, but hopefully we can potentially give you some ideas of things that you need to look for when you're possibly instructing somebody else to do that for you, point you in the right direction, some key points that need to be thought about. And just to try and provide the tools so that you can signpost as well onto other areas of information, so that we have a bank of information where you can then move forward and navigate to where you need to go. And we're going to have a big information hub as well. So that will signpost people away from our site when needed to the relevant parts of Defra, to the relevant parts of Natural England, to other carbon toolkit, other relevant sources of information that are out there, so you can carry on your journey really. So yeah, this is an idea. So it's basically, you've got the 9 icons, and there's also going to be a search function. We're also hoping to have some tags as well, so the whole thing will be interactive. So if you look at something, the site will possibly flag you to, you're interested in this, is this also relevant to you? And we're trying, again, we'll make it a bit prettier. We're still working on it. There's a lot of work to go into it, but we're trying to make it so that everything's easily navigable. You can see all the bits and pieces, dip in and out. Yeah, we've also got a nice glossary as well at the end, because some of the, particularly when we get into compliance and some of the deeper details, some of the words can be quite confusing. So we have a glossary that you can navigate to, the search function, and also we're hoping to incorporate in the front a little bit of a questionnaire, just almost a bit thought-provoking. There may be elements getting ready for Elm that you haven't considered. So we've got lots covering all the 9 areas of potential things that you haven't considered, or maybe you don't have, or you need more information on. So for example, this slide that Julie is just showing at the moment is a guide, basically a click-by-click guide almost, if you like, to create some maps from the UK Soils Observatory. There's an absolute wealth, as Joe's mentioned before, wealth of information on commons and generally on land. So a lot of this information will be relevant to home farms as well as on the commons. And not everybody is gifted to be able to navigate their way around the source of information. So we're trying to, this will look a bit prettier when we get further to it, but try to provide some information, so that some guidance, so you can dip in and see what's relevant to you, see how useful it is, and then also some suggestions as to where you might need to take it if you want to move it on. So yeah, feedback. Yeah, as I say, we're getting go with it. It's a huge project, but we welcome all feedback. We're trying to keep it clear and concise. Some of the documents will be probably quite word heavy, so it's good to know what do people need guidance in, what information would you like to see included, what tools are really useful, where are things, are some things difficult to access, maybe we can help broker in between. If there's some resources that people really struggle to access or to navigate, can we provide some guides? It's just really good to hear yeah, people's feedback, really.
Thank you.
Make sure that there's no point in having a toolkit if it's not used. We want it to be a document that people can dip in and out of and use it. So
judging by the questions that's coming in, definitely something that will be used. So quick question I saw was, where is the toolkit going to be based? Which website? Is it the Foundation website or?
Yes, it'll be based on our main Foundation for Common Land website. It'll have its own separate tab across the top, so it should be really easy to find. Okay, right. I'll pop that in the, or someone could pop that in the chat. That would be great. So there's quite a lot of comment about ecological surveys. I think we've picked up and covered that already, in sense of help with that, or where to go and what to cover, what to make sure that you're collecting the right answer. There's a question about many commons don't have an association and no local people interested in commoning. So will landowners still be able to participate? That's a quick one for you, Julia.
Thank you, Chris. So yes, at the moment, if there's only one beneficiary of a scheme, if there are no commoners at all, then the landowner can apply. And I would expect that to continue. It varies a lot from common to common. It may be that there are commoners who, with the right support, would be interested in using the common and becoming involved. So we always encourage people to link with the commoners, and you still need to go through the process of contacting everybody on the Commons register to see whether they're interested. But yes, there will be some, I imagine there will be some flexibility. What's important is that where it is being, where there are commoners and owners, that it is a collective application.
Great. Ben Scottings asked a question about increased wood cover. On commons, it's very complex and not easily managed. If we're serious about increasing cover on upland commons, then this needs to be considered. I know you've had experience of this, Julia, and
Yeah.
I'm sure Viv has too.
Well, certainly, I think I mentioned earlier about capital. One of the main constraints that's holding back undertaking improvements for both woodland and for peat is the need for upfront capital. And this is a major barrier to improvements. You can have a scheme that's completely agreed by the commoners, but the RPA say it's too risky to go forward with because they can't be sure who's going to be, how it's going to be funded, because it can take several months to get the money back from the RPA. We found quite a few NGOs such as wildlife trusts and woodland trusts have been really supportive in terms of this cash flow, but still it's been hard. So I think the answer is we agree that it needs to be much more straightforward and preferably paid for, as soon as the work is done, then we would prefer that Defra pay directly the contractor for doing it, so that one's not having to pay out and then claim back. I don't see the point. It's just extra bank transfers for no benefit. Here we go. Viv, did you want to add anything more to that with the woodland?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, just to answer, we actually have a live example. One of the participants on this call, Jonathan Murray, has had this issue, and the scheme fell through because they weren't able to upfront cash flow and capital works.
There's a question here from David Pence about the governance burdens on associations. Again, I know this is something that Viv and Julia, you've been concerned about. Do you feel that the toolkit is going to be able to support that and help associations with issues around audits, preparing the commons management plans, etc.?
Yeah, well, we hope so. I mean, the toolkit in itself won't do it, and it doesn't, coming back to Fraser's question, who pays? And as some of you will know, I spend quite a lot of my time supporting commons associations in this as a land agent. Commons deliver the most enormous public benefits, and the costs, there's a transaction costs of making those happen. And our view, overall, is that commons should be supported to do this. So we've had payments in the past with UX1 in the upland entry level stewardship. We've had payments in countryside stewardship as well, and in our HLS, which has supported lowland and upland commons. Our view is that it's essential to both provide sufficient financial support, but then to make sure that the commons are well supported. And we put out a statement with the Tenant Farmers Association saying there should be much more support. And our view is that probably there needs to be more independent support. One of the difficulties is that the burden on chairmen and secretaries can be absolutely enormous, and it can lead to very difficult relationships with neighbours when things don't go well. So it can work well, but our view is that there should be some independent support during that, and that's something. In Wales they funded this through, and Chris knows a lot about this, through the Commons Development Officers, and to make sure that the money is managed in the same way it would be in a sort of effectively in a client account with the same level of governance and check, safeguards.
Yeah. Nick Chappell raises an interesting point. Quantifying environmental change from interventions is not trivial. By that I think it's complex. The extreme spatial variability, natural year-to-year variation, slow trends in soil and vegetation change, for example. What happens if your tools are not sophisticated enough? I'm sure they're going to be very sophisticated, but I take the point that we're not sophisticated enough to show change above natural variability. Does future funding for your area stop? Does government diminish funding for the whole programme? Are these risks real? I guess we're a test and trial about a process, but those issues around commons management plans in terms of mapping environmental change from the interventions introduced will be quite tricky.
Yeah, I think the thing to stress is that in the payments document, there were 2 documents released today, one around SFI and one around payments, is that the government will be supporting good current practice. You don't always have change. So if you are delivering lots of public goods at the moment and you're, commons in favourable condition and you're delivering a whole suite of public goods, then it doesn't mean you have to have significant change. You may choose to change and to do more of one thing or more of another, but good practice will be rewarded is one of the payment principles that's been published by Defra today. But I get the point in terms of technical, how you actually monitor change is really hard, particularly on slow growing habitats. And what is good change and what is, so for instance, if you have some scrub developing on a common, a certain amount of scrub might be really positive for certain species, but then it gets to the point where the scrub gets sort of out of control and then it's encroaching on other habitats, or it may be too dense for certain wildlife. So really most of these habitats require constant management in order to make sure we have a really biodiverse suite of species and also have all the other benefits, and we have enough. How is the grazing going to work? If you can't gather your sheep, then that's not practical either. We need to make sure that we have the cultural heritage, the benefits from the cultural heritage being delivered alongside those from enhancing the natural heritage.
Just one other thing to add to that, Chris, in terms of the management plan template that we've been putting together, and this sort of goes back to the thinking we had right at the beginning around our mapping and what that 10-year vision might look like, or the ambition for the common, and that there's a whole category in there that's about maintaining things that are already good or that we already think are about right. So that would be built into your management plan, so there's so there'd be the column there to tick is we don't want to see this change. We like it as it is. We think it's doing what it needs to do and we want to just maintain it. So that, it's not about everything changing, but, it's getting that mix. So there'll be stuff that we just want to maintain. There will be things we want to improve or even stop doing, so it's getting that mix really. And we want to, hopefully the management plan will be able to build that in.
Great.
It may just very quickly be worth saying one of the suggestions in the SFI 22 is that you identify management actions to address the key objectives. So you do that sort of visioning process. What do we want? But quite specific, what actions could we do? You won't do them as part of that SFI 22, but it gets you prepared for thinking what might you do. And we've done some work on these collective visioning processes. I know in Dartmoor they've done quite a lot as well. And it's looking at how can you develop a grazing plan to deliver those priority actions. There are all sorts of things that are coming now on stream now, such as no fence collars and all sorts. So we all need to keep abreast of the latest changes and see how we can get the best possible outcomes.
Great. Okay. So please don't worry if your question hasn't been answered. We'll get to it when we do the report, but let's keep to time. Very important we finish on time. So Joe, over to you for next steps. I think that's this slide.
So you probably have all read it now. So probably don't need to say too much because it's been up there for a little while. But just to say then, we're in the thick of phase 1 at the minute. So working with our 4 commons and 4 facilitators. Up to the end of July, we're hoping to get most of that work done. So I have this first go at doing some public goods maps. Do a bit more work on this template for a management plan, have a go at filling one in and see how that looks. And then getting these tools, some of the tools in the toolkit, there won't be the whole thing ready immediately, but to ask people to trial over the summer. And so we'll focus in over the summer up to sort of October with a couple more commons. The New Forest, which is going to be exciting and different, not like any of the other commons we've worked with. So we're going to be working with the New Forest over the summer, and then hopefully with a common on Exmoor, which will, again, we'll have a local facilitator, and Tracy, our facilitator on the New Forest, is with us this evening. It's going to be starting work with us in the summer, and then hopefully a common on Exmoor. But what we've also done is left some left some of our budget in the project to invite more people to come and engage with us and have a go at trialing some of those tools that we're developing. So, you know, if you want to have a go at mapping the public goods on your common, using the checklist that we've got and some of the advice around mapping, we'd love to hear from you. You know, we've got space in the project to do that, and we sort of after having a bit of a rejig of our timelines because of COVID, we've built that in, hoping that we would do more of that kind of engagement in the summer. So if there's a couple of things you're interested in, if you want to have a look at our management plan template and have a go with it, or you'd like to read the advice on a public goods map, you know, get in touch with us and we can send that to you. I want to put together a little package that people can have a go at trialing. So do get in touch if you're interested in doing something like that. We would love to hear from you. And then as we get into the winter, really, we'll be sort of starting to put more out on the toolkit and really get into some of that content. We've got a couple more workshops planned to review things, to run things by people like you, to give us more feedback, tell you where we've got to, and then obviously doing our final report for Defra. And the whole thing will wrap up at the end of March 2022. So that's where we are at the moment and what we've got planned. So the main thing I would just say about that is if you are interested in having a go at trialing bits of the toolkit, particularly on public goods and a management plan, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks. I think I can't remember if there's another slide or not. I'll pass back to you, Chris.
There we go.
There we go. Can I just say, I forgot to say as well, Lindsay we didn't introduce Lindsay in terms of introductions, or we're getting to the end of the meeting, is doing a great job of responding to people on the chat. So that's Lindsay Stride, another of our FCL trustees, who's been brilliant in the Q&A and the chat and keeping people to task. So thanks, Lindsay, for that.
Well, that's pretty much what I was
sorry,
no, by summary. No, I think it's very, you'll be on those of you, it's great to have so many of you here on the call, but you'll realise that today we didn't plan this day because we knew that the policy was going to be announced this morning and this afternoon. So hats off to Julia and to Viv and for picking on that and sort of responding. Hopefully it's energized you to go and find more information. And what I'll try and do is put in the chat, or someone else can, where you can find this up-to-date policy announcement information. It's a very fluid landscape. It's a very unsettling landscape. There's sort of disruption going on in terms of BPS declining and other schemes coming on stream. So yeah, if we've excited and increased your awareness, then that's good, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. So if you want to get involved, to get in touch with Jo, you've got her email is on the top there. So if you're involved in a comment that we'd quite like to look in the toolkit or the management plan in more detail, then do get in touch. And I think the other just point I wanted to say is that this is the only test and trial looking at commons specifically, and it's a complicated issue, as your questions have raised, but it's really important that we get it right. Commons are far too iconic and important for this to be overlooked or left to a late, and we're left with trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So I think, Susie, you've got a couple of polls that we're going to put up in the very last few minutes. Do you want to introduce these? So here we go. First poll, has this evening been useful? Would you be interested in attending further webinars hosted by the Test and Trial? Well, that's very positive. So that's really positive. Thank you. And I saw earlier on there was a question, or this may be the next one. So we'll end that one there. That's a resounding positive. Tom, you've raised your hand. You want to unmute and. I'm not quite sure how we deal with raised hands. If you can't unmute yourself, I can't see who you are now.
I think it's a matter of people putting questions in the chat if they want to.
I think there might be questions. We don't have audio. There we go. Sorry, Gwyn. It's not personal, I can promise you. Just a management function. There's a second poll, and I think is this going to be around topics? If there's a topic you want us to cover, then put it in the chat.
No, that's all the polls actually, Chris, although that was a very good idea for one. Maybe we should have included that.
No, don't worry. I think it did come up. So other topics that you want covered, do please put them in the chat. So I can't think of anything else to say other than thank you very much to the speakers tonight. So Julia, Joe, Viv, and fantastic behind the scenes, Owen Fraser, fantastic behind the scenes management from Connie and Lindsay and Susie too, who also spoke. And yeah, really excellent to have your input, so enthusiastic. And these hands are raised and I don't know what to do about it now, unless you want to shout. So everything in the chat, and we will send around a link in the report and the recording, and answers to questions too. So thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your evenings.